This is the eLearning Podcast, episode number 11.
We have students from around the world, and so we're very aware that culture matters, context matters. However, and this is true to the UN too, there's much more that connects us as a human family that we share than that's different.
Welcome to the eLearning Podcast from lmspulse.com. My name is Stephen Laddick, and I'm the director at LMS Pulse. If you don't figure out how to do your courses online, you're out of business. These are the words from my guest for today's episode. Mohit Mukherjee is an expert in organizational development, positive psychology, social entrepreneurialism, and the founding director of the Center for Executive Education at the University of UPEACE, a United Nations established institution. Mohit has been a pioneer in both the social entrepreneurship space and virtual education for many years. He's been particularly focused on graduate and continuing education programs, which in the case of the UN, these have faced challenges from creating courses where people from literally all over the globe have a chance to participate. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this conversation as much as we did, where we talk about the idea of online virtuosity, where we realize that success in online learning is not a matter of technology or a checklist, but your ability to play the music for a specific group of human beings that are participating in your course. We also talk about what learning-centered design is all about and why it stayed relevant in 2020. We also talk about the importance of virtual leadership, or being able to figure out future needs, assess risk, and take action to guarantee success in online learning. And finally, we talk about Mohit's thoughts on the new normal and where a pioneer's mind is now that everyone is already where he is used to being. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The eLearning Podcast is sponsored by the eLearning Success Summit. Learn from more than 40 experts how to teach, work, and learn online without being overwhelmed. Get your free ticket to the summit at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And lmspulse.com, your best source for news, information, and resources for e-learning professionals for more than 10 years. Get our free roundup of the week's top news at lmspulse.com.
Hey, Mo, welcome to the show.
Hi, Stephen. Great to be on. Thank you.
You know, Mo, we see in the background there, and for those people who are just listening to the podcast right now, I can see behind Mohit the University of Peace. You know, there's people holding hands in a green field. There's, you know, the dove of peace and this and that. I don't think that's where you're sitting, though. Where are you at today?
Yeah, I'm actually in West Palm Beach, Florida, and I did put this virtual backdrop on just a couple of days ago, and I've had a lot of people saying, well, you're back in Costa Rica,
Yeah.
which is where the headquarters of the University for Peace is, but no. Just an illusion.
So I want to give a little background, even though people have heard it in the preamble. I want you to tell the story. I'm not going to tell it too much. You're the executive director of the University of Peace, the Center for Executive Education. That's where I'm going to stop. You tell me the story behind how the genesis of that particular center, how you ended up there, and then I want to jump into, you know, why I think it's important to have you on this show. I think there's a great, unique story to tell here. We'll go from there.
Yeah. So, you know, I got to know the University for Peace around 2005, 2006. And at that time, so it's this beautiful campus in Costa Rica. The university itself was established by the United Nations back in the 1980s. And so it's an inspiring place. Great potential. And when I discovered the university, it had 2 master's programs and about 25 students there. And admittedly, it was just launching and growing. But I realized that the only way to engage with the learning and the institution was through a 1-year full-time master's program. And so what I proposed to the university is that they allow me to actually set up a center for executive education that could offer programs under the university's mission, but much more flexible, allowing a lot more people to kind of engage with the university and its offerings. And so that was 15 years ago now that I launched the center. And sure enough, I mean, obviously the university itself has grown. We have about 150 master students from around the world. But the executive ed programs have more than twice that number coming through every year, because our programs are much more flexible short term. So it's been definitely a win-win kind of scenario.
Super cool. And so now to follow that up and fulfill my promise, the reason why I want to have you on the show, not only because I've known you for so long and I think you're going to just have some great insights into this for this audience, but you've been doing this for such a long time that you have an arc that started in the traditional classroom, discovered virtuosity to bring a blended classroom, and now that we're sort of passing through COVID, you've gone full virtual and you're looking to expand your full virtual sort of portfolio that the center offers. And I want to sort of talk through that scenario. We've been talking on the podcast a lot to people about very specific either tech or really specific classroom experiences or pedagogy, those kinds of things. And I think there's a great way to connect here with many of the people who are listening to this show about how did we get here? You know what I mean? How do we get to where we are today? And what are some of the pitfalls along the way? And just as a sort of a great reminder of, holy smokes, we've made such leaps and bounds over the last decade to going from, okay, you show up in class, here's the syllabus, there's the professor, let's lecture, to what we're doing right now, Zoom, right? So when did you, I guess, you started offering classes, at the center? Do I have it right? Was it super traditional, right? People flew in, you did a seminar, you did a thing, and then you tell me how it kind of started out.
Yeah, exactly that. I thought, let's offer a more flexible short-term format. So we had, for example, a 3-day leadership workshop, and people would we still call it positive leadership. People would come in from different countries, have this very engaging experience. But every time we ran one of these short workshops, we would get applicants from places like, I'm myself originally from India, from my country, or Kenya, or even Europe, saying, would love to be at this workshop, but either can't get the visa for Costa Rica, can't justify the travel expenses. So what we did, so the center launched 15 years ago, but about 10 years ago is when we just took the plunge and said, let's look at setting up online courses for our audience that can't make it to Costa Rica. And there, similar to a lot of viewers of this episode, our audience is adult learners. And so we took on, I think, 2 challenges when we created our first online courses. One is, let's make it as engaging as possible. But secondly, let's make it as flexible as possible, given that people are coming in from different time zones and they have typically full-time jobs. So that original design just required 1 hour of kind of a live webinar a week. And these were typically structured as 4-week or 6-week online courses. So really, there was a lot of flexibility around the learning. And I think that's worked quite well. However, what I realized fairly early on is that they were in fact 2 different offerings. Let's say if you took a 3-day immersive leadership workshop in country, in person, the online course was different. It was over a much longer period of time. It was assuming that you are not blocking time on your calendar to join live sessions. Even the 1 hour a week webinar was recorded. So it was really structured to allow complete flexibility. And so the change that's happened, I think, in the last 100 days, and I'm not counting, but so we've now said, okay, the live in-person workshops, what does that look like? And we're calling it live online. So we continue to do kind of our 4 to 6 week online courses for learners around the world who want complete flexibility. But we've also, and I would say fairly successfully, translated these immersive experiences into immersive online experiences, where we do ask people to block 3 hours on your calendar. So far, we haven't done anything that requires more than 3 hours at a time per day, but we've taken, let's say, a 16-hour 2-day workshop and put it into a 4-day period instead,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
reduce the time a little bit. So I can talk a little bit more about that journey. But I think that's something that, again, the COVID situation has really, I'd say, forced us to create something that we should have probably created a long time ago, because that's quite different from a completely flexible online experience.
So I'm interested to see, and what's really dawned on me, and I hate to say this, now that we're kind of in the middle of the episode here, is that one of the key conversations that's happening right now is just sort of the disruption that's happening to the higher ed space overall. And it sounds like, I mean, you were a disruptor 10 years ago. You went to the university and said, hey, look, you've only got this one pathway in. Why don't we offer some different opportunities? And then you're like, wow, let's even offer, an online opportunity. Did it feel the same way, 10 years ago, that you were like, look, I'm on the bleeding edge here? Was the administration just like, oh yeah, go for it. This is great. Let's run with it. Was there resistance? And the reason why I'm asking that is, do you see the same thing happening now, where universities, or especially University of UPEACE, is just trying to figure out where do we fit now, and how do we deliver, and what are student expectations for not only what a degree is going to offer, but how they receive it?
So great question. I'm reflecting on it as I answer. I think 10 years ago, I did feel like a disruptor, in the sense that there were many reasons universities were shying away from taking that leap, right? What's that going to do to the business model? If we start offering online programs, is it going to cannibalize our own face-to-face programs? I think a big resistance was people getting their head around it, right? Like, how is this going to work? How am I going to interact? And so there was a technology piece, there was a kind of a business model piece. And then I think anyone taking on something new in the online space, there wasn't necessarily the necessity yet to do it. And so that's where I felt like, I want to try this. What's the worst case scenario? By the way, I love learning. What an opportunity to learn and meet our potential students' needs who can't travel to go. So there were many reasons why I was happy to make that leap of faith. And quick anecdote: we launched. We kind of advertised our first online course. I hadn't built it yet. I wanted to make sure that I have a number of students before I build it. And we got to that number, and then I started having sleepless nights, because I was like, I don't really know. So it's just admit it's and it did take a lot of that I got to get it done, because the course kicks off and I don't exactly know what I'm doing, and I'm hoping that it comes out well, because I'm committed to this, yet I have not done it before. And so it was a stressful experience. Very glad I took it on. I think fast forward 10 years, by the way, and then the University for Peace also did it too. That they now have a fully online master's program, so they did need someone to kind of try it out and show them the way.
Everybody needs an icebreaker, sure. Everybody needs somebody to take the lead. And hey, look, and I want I want to finish your story, but circle back. Like, I want to hear some of those fails along the way. Like that's that. But anyway, let's tie this in a bow.
So I think now we're in a very different time. I think now it's. If you don't do that, if you don't figure out how to deliver your face-to-face programs online, you're out of business, right? So what a lot of universities have done, so my wife, for example, works at Palm Beach State College, big community college. When COVID broke, they just told their professors, deliver online. I mean, there was no necessarily. So some faculty were already doing some online and some face-to-face, so they didn't have necessarily a problem to try to figure out what that meant. But there were other faculty who were only teaching online, and they didn't know what that meant. Right? And so, of course, there was some kind of task force created. Help your peers figure it out. But it was a necessity, right? They weren't going to refund the students their tuition. The students needed to finish the program. And with the fall, they haven't yet made the call, but plan A is to continue online. So very different situation and circumstance. And I think people who are, let's say, and I've seen institutions that are just delaying their start date in the fall because they don't want to put their head around what it would take to not just deliver online, but deliver it well.
Right.
And so I think, yeah, so I think that's, I wouldn't advocate for that position. I'd say what an opportunity to really figure out what it means to take something like a design thinking workshop, right? And I'm sure a number of audience members are familiar with design thinking, but very hands-on. One of the first things I do in my design thinking workshop is you build something out of materials. It's a prototype, and you show it to your partner who you built it for. Like, what does that look like in the virtual world? And maybe the last thing I want to say on this is I've done a lot of kind of best practices for engaging people virtually, and I can get to some of the failure stories. I don't think there is a formula for doing this, whether it's the technology or it's very different if you're looking at young undergrads and trying to say, hey, everyone put on your Zoom camera. What does that create in a teenage girl, right? The fact that everyone's now staring at her, she's just totally distracted, staring at herself and wondering if she should have a different virtual background or if her hair is okay. So yes, good to have people put on their camera like that, but no, it's not always the case with every audience. So I'm just finding that I come back to, I think one thing UPEACE is really good at is this idea of empathy, right? And so who's the audience? What are you trying to achieve as an educator? What is the audience trying to achieve? And that will determine the technology, the camera usage, the interactivity. It's just not that easy, which is kind of cool, because I don't think education should be easy. I think it's a highly relational, personalized journey, and it is online too. Yeah.
It sounds like, if I can paraphrase what you're talking about, and maybe this is a conclusion I've already made myself, is humans are messy, human relationships are messy, and so the relationship factor when you're, on a stage or in front of a class trying to impart knowledge or either coach people through knowledge discovery, it's a messy process, right? And the variables that you're going to have with each of the students are going to be tremendous. You're going to have some introverts, you're going to have some extroverts, you're going to have language barriers, you're going to have, just different life backgrounds, you're going to have different economic standings, and all of those factors play into what can I learn, how can I learn, how do I learn best, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, right? And we're always looking for that equalizer. Now that we're bumping into this online virtuosity, whatever, online all the time kind of system, you kind of hear that it's always on your shoulder in the background. It's like, well, it's tech, so it's, there's got to be one solution, right? There's got to be a way to be able to, okay, we can put together the puzzle pieces so that it just works, and yet that's never ever the case. You have to be able to be flexible. You have to be able to play the music, so to speak, within whatever class that you put together, right? So I mean, it sounds like that's where you're headed right there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I would say, and I'm going to draw an analogy to, again, coming from the University for Peace, we have students from around the world. And so we're very aware that culture matters, context matters. However, and this is true to the UN too, there's much, much more that connects us as a human family that we share than that's different, right? So I do think that when I have a group of students online, there's certain best practices, that were the same in the classroom. Is are students having, is there clarity of structure of what's going to happen? Is there space for interaction? Is it learner centered? Is there some differentiation in the pathway they could take? Are the assignments taking into account their why for being in the course? So those principles stay the same. The technology, I spent a lot of time. I do default to Zoom as the platform that I can handle best in terms of things like breakout rooms, sharing a whiteboard, having people, maybe I draw a change continuum on and share the whiteboard, and people annotate where they are on that. So I think being able to handle the technology is essential, because then you might want to do something but you don't know how to do it, which is a huge handicap. But then figuring out for that particular group, and given your mastery of the platform, exactly what you're going to do, that looks different every time, just like it would look different in a classroom. So some of those principles of learner-centered design, I stick with.
Sure.
There are some variations also, given certainly the things that I've tried to replicate, like an activity that I love in the classroom. It's people sitting around in a chair and doing some brainstorming, and the person who's kind of challenge you're solving has to turn their chair so that they're not, the people who are giving him or her ideas are actually not seeing his or her expression as they're brainstorming. So I thought, I love that in a classroom. How can I replicate that on Zoom? And I figured
turn
it
the
out.
video off.
Exactly. You have to mute yourself and turn your video off.
Yeah.
So you can still listen to your group, but they can't see you, they can't hear you, you can't interject. So there's fun stuff like that. But then there are other things that you just have to change. Recently, with the situation around white privilege, and we were looking at this idea of the some of you may know the privilege walk, and then there's certain things I wouldn't try to replicate online. I just thought, no, that one, let's not go there.
Right.
So it's been, to summarize, yes, there's a high level of art, and I do think those principles of good teaching and learning to a large extent still apply.
So if you can take a snapshot of 2010 to 2020, what have been the most radical changes about how you're delivering courses online? Is it truly like tech has changed so radically that it's just things are available, things are there, it's easy, and whereas before you really had to work and a lot of setup, and just it wasn't, and things are now just sort of, hey, click 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 and it's done. Is it connectivity's available now more? Is it that just people have a better vocabulary and more comfortable? What are the things, between then, give me a then and now, like what are the pieces?
Yeah, all of the above. I think I can't even remember the name of the platform we used to use 10 years ago for when we did the webinar piece, right? But it was definitely much more of this top-down approach, where the facilitator would come with his or her presentation and would be able to share slides, I think, and then there was probably a chat box for questions. So we didn't try to make it interactive. We figured the interaction could happen on the LMS platform in kind of a forum chat, right? So we had those pieces separate. And that now with Zoom, for example, when because we still have those online courses that were created 10 years ago, they still exist to allow maximum flexibility. But in the piece where people do come together for that 1 hour classroom session a week, we encourage all our facilitators that hour should be super interactive. I mean, the content piece should have been posted as a video, or should have been posted, people should have engaged with that prior. So it's a bit like the flipped classroom idea popularized by the Khan Academy, in the sense that the learning, the content, we try to have happen before the webinar. And the webinar is really for engagement, where we do encourage people to turn on the videos. We do these small, even paired chats, pair up with somebody. If there's 22 people on the webinar, you have 11 breakout rooms, come back, pair share. It very much feels like an engaged room of people having different conversations, coming back together. And I don't think the technology would have allowed for that. Even bandwidth wise, we wouldn't have been able to pull that off. On the flip side, I think a lot of participants are much more comfortable. We have participants from around the world, so I think they're much more familiar also with online learning. So the learning curve for them to be able to engage that way, many have already had past experiences, and the ones who haven't, they've had similar experiences in a different context. So it's looking very, very different. Yeah.
What's your favorite fail from the last 10 years? Has it been, an entire course just didn't go off and, all the videos disappeared? Was it, is it always a tech fail, or was it, a teacher fail, like a professor fail?
Yeah, and I'm trying to think about how to tell this story without necessarily. I don't know who's going to watch this if they're like, oh, let me see who are the facilitators.
We will call them Shireen. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. But the story is, I think one of the things that the Center for Executive Education tries to do is we're friendly and professional, right? So we want people to feel, by professional, I mean, like, if you have a question, if you have an email, if on the administrative side, what's going on, things are, so the friendly is like when you're, in a class with somebody, your facilitator, you feel they're accessible, it's this concept of psychological safety. There are no bad questions. So we emphasize that because virtually, that's a little harder to create, right? That sense that my professor is accessible. And so I think we had one facilitator take that friendly piece way too far, right? Like, friendly isn't necessarily, if I've just got a puppy, I'm going to have my puppy in the webinar and occasionally barking and saying, oh, so sorry, like, I'm just going to be back in 2 minutes. That I think is not understanding the original idea of being friendly. Friendly is to disarm the any tension and any hierarchy, but that's just plain distracting. That's actually interfering with the learning objective. So we got we had a situation where a whole class, kind of 4 weeks went by before we realized, wow, this is like not mutiny. What we had.
Total mutiny.
Yeah, and what had happened is life circumstances had changed for a particular facilitator, and they thought that they could incorporate their new life into the class, including maybe not being so prompt in responding to people and things. So yes, and we realized after that, just like if we had sessions happening on campus and the facilitator walks out, we'd be like, how did things go? And we talk to students in lunch, so we get an informal sense of how are things going. We didn't, we always have an end of class evaluation, but that's too late when things haven't gone well for 4 weeks.
Sure.
So we realized we just need to create a way where we can more informally check on progress, even though it's a virtual session. So yeah, that was a big takeaway. Obvious one, perhaps, but.
Well, you know what? Yes and no. And if I can draw from just my personal experience of what's happening, as many of the people listening here know, I've got 3 kids, and all of them have been doing complete virtual learning, during COVID here for the last, whatever it is, 3 or 4 months. Some of their teachers are rock stars, right? Some of them have they're either naturals with the technology or are behind a camera or whatever, and they've delivered, at the different grade levels. And some of them have either phoned it in or just, barely made it to getting the learning, in front of the kids. And we're left with the sense. I mean, we have a pretty highly resourced international school that our kids go to, and so you're left wondering as a parent, like, where are those checks and balances? How do I raise my hand as a parent in this case and say, hey, I don't think this is. I think we need something different here. I think we need some adjustment here. So I wouldn't say that it's. I think it's one of those things where we all know we should do it, right? We all know that we should, but it's not necessarily that easy, or, I think it goes back to that first principle of nobody wants to be told that, hey, you need some constructive criticism, or we really need to follow up with that. We can't let, rest on we can't assume that the person we hired is going to deliver good. Right. And that's always a difficult thing.
Yeah.
So where are you at today with the center? I'm assuming right now that you're not accepting people on campus quite yet. Are you total virtual at this stage?
We are. Yeah.
And so what does that look like? Have you moved everything online, or have you put some things on hold and you're accentuating other courses, or you've built new material and new offerings, or?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Most offerings. So the good thing is we did have already some offerings that were completely online. Like we have a diploma in global leadership, 5 completely online courses. I think it's a very affordable price, less than $2,500. So, and then we have a similar diploma in social innovation. Again, 5 online courses required. There's a menu. There's a longer list of courses. So, given the situation where people were working from home, not really being able to go anywhere, even though economically a lot of people were hit, there were a lot more people who were interested in whether it's skilling up for recent grads or professional development for people who were continuing in their jobs. So we did kind of do a marketing push on these 2 diploma programs that we had, which previously, 90% of our work was face-to-face. So our online diplomas, again, they filled a need. We know that we have people who can't travel to Costa Rica, but we didn't really market it much. And so we did kind of make a marketing push on these 2 diplomas, and that went very well. I think we got in about 40 new students. Again, we never have more than 24 on a course, but across different courses, this worked out very well. We added an element of coaching, so one-on-one coaching outside of the diploma program, because we did feel that some of these new participants in these online diplomas would have actually taken it face-to-face. So we kind of offered that higher touch one-on-one, 4 one-on-one sessions during a certain period of time. So that's what we did with our existing online programs, basically marketed them.
Yeah, pushed them.
Pushed them, yeah, and made small tweaks. On the work that we would usually do face-to-face, so a couple of interesting stories. One is we work with a lot of US universities who want a short-term study abroad experience in Costa Rica. So most of them have just pushed back to 2021. But for one of the universities, we're creating a virtual study abroad program. Oh. Yeah, it's a fairly low budget. We had originally suggested things like, virtual reality goggles for all the participants in the US. Then we go out to the field in Costa Rica and create some videos that make them really feel like they're in this, because we do a lot of field visits and things. Didn't have the budget for this. Maybe it's a good thing. It would have been a lot of experiments in one.
I was just going to say that is one heck of a deep dive leap for you to we're just going to go do 3D videos.
Yeah. Fortunately, I have a very good friend who's in this space. But but what we decided to do is things like everything from. Typically, when a group of students would come to Costa Rica, they would be exposed to Costa Rican cooking and language and meet people who run these organizations. So you can imagine how you can set some of these up virtually, right? From sending them the recipe for Costa Rica's most famous gallo pinto rice and beans dish, and everyone makes it, to having the kind of a case study of let's say a coffee plantation they would have visited, but then having the owner talk to them about their corporate social responsibility policy. So the nice thing for us is we had a university that was willing to go that direction. For the students, it's at a much lower cost. And I do think that depending on how long this no travel situation goes, I can see that more and more universities would say, wow, this is actually a great way to get to our learning objectives. I mean, being in country is not the point, right? The point is a global mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get to those learning objectives if we can't get on a plane and be in the street, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's an educational problem that we're solving, and the technology can enable that, but it's fundamentally about what learning, what mindset changes are we typically enabling, and how would we enable that if people aren't in country. The other one is just, corporate workshops. We work with a lot of companies. I'm designing a session for P&G. That one's, initially it started off as how do we lead virtual teams, and so that first session was best practices, and let's it wasn't rocket science. But then we got into, we want to talk about psychological safety, and so that session again was one that if I have people in the room, would be very dynamic exchange of ideas. What can each person do to build psychological safety? So that was an interesting one to structure in a virtual space. And talking about unexpected changes, I had spoken to the team lead, and I said, it would be great if everyone, just like if they were at a team meeting in the office or in a classroom at UPEACE, if everyone's comfortable turning on their videos, so we can kind of identify people, and then that's part of building psychological safety. It's okay, I can see that in your background you have a couple of kids running around. Part of it is we need to understand each other's context better. But it started off with the team lead saying, hey, Mohit, I know you'd asked for videos on, but we're having bandwidth problems, so no one's going to turn on their videos.
Oh, the whole thing planned out. I love it. I love it.
Right.
Yeah.
So when people were talking, I didn't know who they were. There were enough people on that call. So again, one has to adjust, of course, in ways that if I have people in a room and everyone showed up with a paper bag over their face, it's just not happened to me yet,
No, but it goes back to that, the human messiness, and it's the art form of it's something that I've talked with, with several of the people on the podcast here and over in the eLearning Success Summit that we did a couple months back as well, where you just have to be ready to respond to what the needs of the learner are. You have to be able to respond to what the situation puts in front of you. And there's not going to be that either technology bundle that you put together or even a pedagogy or curriculum that you put together that's going to be awesome for everyone. And even if you did, life will intervene, right? My kids could walk in through the door, or, there's electrical storm and my internet goes out, or, there will be something that intervenes, right? Yeah. So it's, so maintaining that art form. I love it. I love keeping that real, especially since there's just been so much emphasis on this virtuosity and delivering virtual, that ultimately we just have to be adult. And as you say, friendly and professional. I like that. I like those two pieces. So you're fully online right now. One of the things I've been asking everybody at the end, sort of the last question here, what's your anticipation for maybe the coming school year? And is there anything, either new normal that you're anticipating is definitely, things are going to stay this way. We've leaped a frog, or, we have crashed the threshold now where, like, okay, this is, online learning not only is here to stay, but most people are going to be demanding it, or maybe there's a new tech or whatever. What are your thoughts about, 3 months, 6 months out, about what you're anticipating for, what you're planning for?
Yeah. So, maybe my answer is being echoed by other people. I feel that it's probably not very original. In the short term, hard to predict, right? Whether it's 3 or 6 months. It's a looking at kind of the virus versus vaccination. But I do think if I project forward even a couple of years, 2-3 years, I do think that thanks to this period, people will be much more open to online, and whether it's the live online kind of format where we do have longer sessions with as if you were in the room together, to just the online, more traditional online, where a lot of the learning and sharing happens asynchronously. Because a lot more people have been exposed to it on the kind of student side, students, parents, and then a lot of educators have also, like I said, some of them have been just forced into it overnight, but figured it out, seen some of the benefits. So I think what's going to happen is certainly there are going to be many instances where, and I'm thinking first about the professional development context, so adult learning, companies that are thinking about where there's going to be some blend of let's do this leadership 1-year leadership program where only twice a year people come together in person, but let's do all the rest of the stuff online. So we have that relationship built right at the beginning. People meet, get to know each other, and so they'll know, the client will know what they're talking about, right? Because they've experienced it. Because in the past, often, as an educator who's been working in this online space for a decade, there were many times I'd suggest an architecture that had a blended approach or a strong online approach. But often, if I was talking to a client who really either hadn't had positive experiences or hadn't been exposed to that world, they weren't really listening, right? It was all about, what can we do face to face?
Yeah, how can you show up on an airplane and deliver for us, or how can we send our students there, or whatever. Yeah, that was just always the solution. Now that door has been opened for sure.
Definitely. And of course, there's obviously, some of the cost savings, some of the time savings of being able to learn and engage effectively virtually are obvious. So I think it's it's become much more in people's comfort zone. That being said, so for example, Harvard had never offered previously a fully online master's program, and the Harvard Ed School decided for the upcoming year that they're going to do that. But they said it's a one-time thing, right? Now, they've said one time because, again, I think they don't know.
One time in history, we're going to make this decision to continue to do this.
That's right. Right. Because once you've done it once,
you can't. You can't open that door and then close it. You just can't. Not the H. Yeah.
So I do think that there's going to be a lot of changes for the better. On the center side, when I think about my program, definitely it's going to affect what I pitch people, our suite of courses, the level to which our facilitators are now trained and familiar with, again, maybe back to the technology, the possibilities that the technologies offer. And even though this is not my strength, the technical part, I know enough where I say, okay, we're doing this. Let's say there's this brainstorm. What does leadership mean to you? I have 22 people in the room. Everybody types in one word, and I cut and paste and I create a word cloud that I share with them. So sometimes it's just putting together different things. But I would never do that if I were in a classroom. That would go up on a flip chart or something. And then we wouldn't have that beautiful word cloud. So there's stuff that I don't want to give up now that I've discovered how efficient some of these online tools are. Yeah.
Mohit, I know, and for everybody who's listening, I mean, I've known you for super, what we're going on 10 years now ourselves. Always a pleasure to talk to you. I really thank you, especially in this tight time, for giving up, an hour of your time to talk to us about your experience. I hope that we'll be able to have you back on the show again, sometime in the future. But I hope all the best for the center and for the new courses you're putting out there. Thanks so much.
Hey, thank you so much for the opportunity, Stephen. Really, really enjoyed it.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the eLearning Podcast. If you like what you've learned today in this episode, I encourage you to either follow us or subscribe to us on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. And please do share this episode with one or two of your colleagues or friends. Also, I just want to remind you that you can level up your online learning game with all of the information that's available at the eLearning Success Summit. You can get your free ticket at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And finally, You can also stay up to date on everything that's important, all the news and the resources for e-learning professionals at lmspulse.com. Get our free newsletter by just going to lmspulse.com today. Thanks again.